Chapter 38. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. Defeated on the battlefield and deprived of its military, the United Nations of Earth began to collapse. When the Galactic Defense Force landed on Terra Nova in the Alpha Centauri system, white flags were already flying above Level City. On board the science nexus that housed Yutaka Yamamoto University, all of the weapons were loaded aboard two escape pods and jettisoned into space long before the GDF arrived. At the edge of human territory, Jericho Station surrendered before GDF warships could finish emerging from hyperspace. In the constellation Orion, one of the last human warships intentionally crashed into the surface of a barren planet, while her crew, in their escape pods, drifted towards a GDF outpost. UN Space Rangers, scattered across distant worlds, threw down their weapons and armor, sat around campfires, and waited for the end. Formed at the last second, partisan groups tried to seize control of space stations and colonies, but their hasty declarations of independence were ignored. Those who continued to resist found themselves doing battle with the Batera. Under Irabik's command, the Batera swept across human space like a tsunami. The machines waged war unlike anything seen before, leaving the leaders of the GDF staring in horrified awe. True to their claim, the Batera outright ignored unarmed civilian vessels, but any spacecraft that carried both weapons and UN insignia was attacked and destroyed with ruthless efficiency. On planets and space stations alike, Batera warforms were very selective in their fights. Macavity, Irabik, and the Galactic Custodian all heard multiple reports of how the Batera viciously attacked anyone who was armed and spared those who were not. On a Chinese colony, there was even a story of how Batera lunged forward to attack a group of people, only to freeze and become docile when the would-be fighters dropped their weapons to the ground. Aboard her flagship, Queen Marka took note of how distant human colonies were still subject to the earthbound nations that founded them. "I've never seen such an arrangement before," Marka mused. "A whole colony and hundreds of space stations, all under the jurisdiction of a government that only controls a portion of the Homeworld surface." Her dragon-like advisor presented the custodian with a map of the United Kingdom. "This nation is the size of Mahurangi City, yet it holds dominion over 3 whole planets. Perhaps the galactic community could learn something about the human way of running things," he said. "True, but human society needs to survive first," Marka replied, and she pointed at the hyperwave relay, where yet another report of a mass human surrender had just arrived. October 28th, 2086. Jupiter, Sol Star System. The spaceplanes Archangel and Niagara emerged from hyperspace together. A moment later, the Higaran pirate ship Ashoka and her escort fleet appeared as well. As soon as Himawari brought her systems online, a voice crackled over the radio. "Attention Higaran fleet! We surrender!" It was Port Armstrong, the very first starbase ever constructed by humans. High above Jupiter, the gargantuan installation was so large it had its own gravitational pull that affected the smaller moons. Port Armstrong could have easily put up a substantial fight against the invading fleet, but her commander had seen the writing on the wall. The two battered spaceplanes drew near one another and started to transmit messages. "That's it," Varian said from the cockpit of the Niagara. "We've got a clear path to Earth from here." "I am worried," Himawari replied. "Even with the aid of the Batera, there may not be enough of us to subdue Earth itself." Stormbreakers and privateers alike agreed with Himawari. Recent events had radically changed this final campaign. Instead of putting up a fight, defending their homes to the last, the overwhelming majority of the human race simply surrendered. Like the rest of the galaxy, the humans were tired of being in a state of life-or-death crisis. Exhaustion was taking its toll, in more ways than one. With each planet, starbase, or habitat that surrendered, a small portion of the Galactic Defense Force had to be left behind on a mercy mission. The newly occupied territory needed to be administered, and also supplied with food and amenities. All of this required both soldiers and starships to be taken from the GDF, meaning the fleet that now invaded the Sol system was significantly smaller than the one that departed Karos only a short time ago. Varian, Corder, Maui, Nainu, Setla, and Kingi all took turns looking out of the cockpit window, staring at the distant point of bluish light. Himawari and her companions did the same. Aboard the Ashoka, Hali looked ahead to Earth, while Runhan kept a watchful eye on Irabik, who was commanding the Batera from her own custom-built workstation. Aboard the Partogan warship Mahuika, Queen Marka and her advisor calculated how long it would take them to reach Earth from here. Our estimated time of arrival will be about 10 days from now, the advisor said. Radio and hyperwave transmissions from the surface indicate severe political disruption, Your Majesty. I strongly suspect Pascal Etienne is no longer in power. I concur, Queen Marka replied. Order the fleet to halt their advance. Give everyone a chance to rest, recover, and rearm. We must give Robinson enough time to try and remove Etienne on his own. If we have a chance to avoid a full-scale invasion, we must take it. You've taken the words right out of my mouth, Your Majesty. The advisor's voice wavered a little. How long do you think we'll have to wait? A knowing smile came over the Galactic Custodian's face. She fiddled with her scarf in a playful way. Not long, I think, she said. Before the advisor could ask why she felt so confident, a communications officer spoke up from the other side of the hyperwave relay, waving his arms urgently to get Marka's attention. Madam Custodian, we're receiving a hyperwave transmission from Earth. The transmitter is committing a causality violation. They're calling you from 2 weeks in the future. 2 weeks in the future, you don't say, Marka repeated, smirking. Let me hear it. November 9th, 2086. Berlin, Germany. A dark atmosphere settled over Berlin. The city, once alive with energy and noise and light, now felt like a necropolis. The streets were deserted, windows and doors boarded up, while buildings that once housed alien embassies smoldered and smoked. Trash skittered in the wind. Berlin was preparing itself for the second alien invasion in living memory. Up on the second floor of the Reichstag, the United Nations Security Council was gathering for another emergency meeting. As the delegates from the member states took their seats, Secretary General Pascal Etienne was having a hurried conversation with Eric DeAngelis, the former president of the Security Council. Each month, the presidency of the UN Security Council rotated to another country. Since the United Kingdom was no longer president, Eric DeAngelis returned to his original position, representing the United Kingdom on the Council. This month, Ukraine would be serving as president of the Security Council. Pascal Etienne and Eric DeAngelis were talking to the president of Ukraine, a man named Ruslan Shmihal. Next to the Secretary General, one of his advisors, Marcus Robinson, was looking worried. The door to the Security Council chamber opened, and Blake Robinson entered. He was dressed in a business casual suit and looked as though he had just come from a meeting of the Disarmament Committee. Blake grabbed Marcus firmly by the shoulder, spun him around, and said, "Where's my granddaughter?" There was a fire in Blake's eyes, not seen since the Second Hyperspace War. "Canaveral," Marcus replied in a shaking voice. "Sophie's at Canaveral right now." Blake glared at Marcus before turning to leave. He was just at the door when DeAngelis called after him. "Chairman Robinson, you may want to stick around for this." Looking around, Blake spotted the Secretary General for the first time. Moving quickly, President Shmihal gavelled the Security Council into session. This emergency meeting was called at the request of Secretary General Pascal Etienne, Schmihal said. Secretary General Etienne, you have the floor. There was a lot of noise as several delegates turned in their seats to face the UN leader. Secretary General Etienne was clutching a piece of paper in his hands and turned it over repeatedly as he spoke. I have spent a great deal of time considering the events of the past few weeks, Etienne said. The actions at Alpha Centauri, Spain, Russia, and Morocco have strained the office of Secretary General and pushed our capabilities to their limit. And it is with the greatest reluctance that I confess myself unable to deliver the quick and decisive retribution I promised to yourselves and your constituents. While the legitimate government of Russia was returned to power after a brief standoff, I confess the UN Peacekeeper Office does not have the manpower or resources needed to repeat this feat in Spain or Morocco. For some reason, the delegates of these two countries did not look upset at Etienne's words. Their eyes flicked from Blake Robinson to Pascal Etienne and back again. The Secretary General continued. Indeed, while I am not conscious of any failures or errors committed in the course of my duties, I will be the first to admit the possibility that such failures or errors exist. After much consideration, I have decided my next course of action. I was counseled by many to carry on, to keep up the fight, and defy those who would see all that I've built crumble. But recent events have convinced me of the opposite. The honorable delegation from the United Kingdom has threatened to use its veto power against my candidacy for a fourth term, an act that would deadlock this council and paralyze it during a moment of crisis. This is unacceptable. Were I to resist and fight on against a Security Council veto, it will only bring needless pain and suffering that could be avoided. To you, the Security Council of the United Nations, I declare tonight that I shall withdraw my candidacy for the office of Secretary General. When my term ends, on December 31st of this year, I will step aside in favor of whatever successor you choose. When his speech concluded, Etienne began to slowly walk out of the room, escorted by Marcus. When they reached the door, Secretary General Etienne put out a hand to steady himself, and by doing so, dropped the piece of paper he was holding. Blake swooped down to pick it up before offering it back to Etienne. As he took the paper, Blake felt the raised bumps of the Braille language. Having worked in Etienne's government for over a decade, Blake knew how to read Braille. He understood what the note said, even though he never saw the text. To the President of the Security Council, I hereby resign the office of Secretary General of the United Nations of Earth. Sincerely, Pascal Etienne. Etienne had come into the room intending to quit, changed his mind at the last second, and chose to drop out of the election instead. Either way, the result was the same. After 15 years, Pascal Etienne's time as leader of Earth had come to an ignominious and unceremonious end. Before Blake could process this, the Security Council was already discussing the matter of succession. We only have one candidate left, said the President of Iceland. We should recommend Chairman Robinson to the General Assembly by acclamation at once. Agreed, replied the Prime Minister of Spain. We cannot be without a leader at a time like this. Everyone turned their attention toward the recently reinstated Russian president. The man folded his arms, knowing what the group was expecting. 5 years ago, the Russian Federation used its veto power to halt the candidacy of Blake Robinson, the president said. While the Russian Federation does have several objections to the prospect of a Robinson administration, it sees no reason to use its veto at this time. We will abstain from any vote regarding Robinson's ascent to the post of Secretary General. There was a general exhaling of noise around the room as everyone relaxed. After this, the Governor General of Barbados addressed Blake. Chairman Robinson, will you accept this body's recommendation of your candidacy to the General Assembly? And if you are elected by that body, will you serve the office of Secretary General to the best of your ability? Blake regarded the Security Council, his expression unreadable. Then he walked to the center of the horseshoe formation created by the assembled tables. Turning to look at each delegate in turn, he said, I am ready and willing to do my duty, but first... Several delegates looked nervously at one another. These are extraordinary times, Blake said. So I will take up the position if and only if the Security Council agrees in writing to abide by my conditions. The Security Council was struck dumb. After a moment, the President of France stood up, outraged. You're setting conditions for your own election, he said. What makes you think you can make demands of us before you've secured the post? For the first time, a triumphant look dawned on Blake's features. Simple, he said. I am the only candidate left in the running, and you don't have time to start the process over again, unless you feel like asking Etienne to extend his current term. And I have it on good authority he will refuse to stay on after his term is up. But if you really feel like my conditions are too much for you, then I'll just go back to the Disarmament Committee. To prove his point, Blake turned to leave, stepping out of the horseshoe. Wait a moment, called the Barbados Governor General. Tell us your demands first. If they are reasonable, we may be able to accommodate you. It took all of Blake's self-discipline to keep from smiling. He had won. November 9th, 2086. Orlando, Florida. Inez blinked. It took her a few minutes to remember where she was and why she ended up here. She was in a recovery room at the Orlando Gene Therapy Clinic, lying on a medical gurney. Inez tried to sit up, but a painful ache in her gut forced her back down. It felt like someone had punched Inez in the stomach. Oh, hey, Sleeping Beauty is awake, said a voice next to her. Inez Espinosa had clearly spent the night in one of the chairs. A bundle of blankets was coiled up next to him like a nest. Inez started to say a warm word of greeting, but as soon as she showed signs of movement, a black and white torpedo shot across the room and threw itself onto the bed. Inez gasped as a skinny young girl with messy black hair wrapped herself around Inez in a tearful hug. Nazi! The girl cried out. I was so scared you wouldn't wake up. That's because she was under anesthesia, Emmanuel yawned. Enutanga could have held her loudest concert in here, and Nazi never would have woken up. Don't call me Nazi, Inez mumbled, her mouth full of the strange girl's unkempt hair. And who the hell are you? The skinny person finally got off Inez and stood next to the bed. Inez was startled by just how much this individual looked like Cassandra. But she was too tall to be subject to. This person was a kid, standing just over 4 feet tall. She had shoulder-length black hair that was blacker than the darkest night, and vivid green eyes, set above a scattering of freckles. For reasons beyond Inez, this lanky kid was wearing clothes that were way too small for her. She looked as though she'd been stuffed into her pants, and the buttons of her shirt strained as though they were going to pop free at any moment. Inez held back a snicker, wondering why this kid was being crammed into last year's clothes. Then, after half a second, Inez was hit by a realization. She gasped and sat bolt upright. Oh, Holy Jericho, how long was I asleep? Inez screamed. Emmanuel and the lanky kid looked at each other and then burst into laughter. Oh man, I can't do it, Emmanuel choked. Do it! Tell her! Giggled the skinny girl. Just say it! When Emmanuel doubled up with laughter, the kid addressed Inez, talking in a spooky Halloween voice. Welcome to the world of tomorrow! You've been asleep for 1,000 years! The lanky girl raised her eyebrows in a funny way and then did some strange poses. I'm not a little kid anymore, she went on. Now I'm all grew up. Inez snorted. Then she started laughing. It hurt to laugh, but she laughed anyway. Cassandra! Inez grabbed the kid and tousled her hair. You stinker! How'd you do it? Holograms? Inez brushed her hands along Cassandra's shoulders, searching for a hidden emitter. Both Cassandra and Emmanuel shook their heads. You've only been out for like a day and a half, Emmanuel said. Cassie just had a growth spurt. Inez looked back at her half-sister. Now that Emmanuel said something, all the puzzle pieces came together. This skinny brat really was Cassandra. At some point while Inez was in surgery, probably during the night, Cassandra sprouted like the mythical beanstalk. She was taller but not full-sized yet. Also, Cassandra's face had noticeably changed shape, and many of her freckles were gone. Inez gave her sister a smile. Congratulations, you're a preteen now, Inez said. Enjoy it, 'cause soon your body's gonna turn against you and you'll wish you were a kid again. So, what have I missed? Before I went under, I heard something about a political hubbub in Berlin, something about a reaction to the big battle at Alpha Centauri. Emmanuel let out a low whistle. You've missed a lot. Secretary General Etienne did a public mea culpa in front of the Security Council and dropped out of next month's election. Inez's eyes widened. You're kidding, she gasped. Not in the least, Emmanuel said. So that means Robinson's running unopposed now. He hasn't been elected yet, but he's already acting like the SecGen. He's communicating with UN leadership, negotiating with the American warlords. I even heard he reached out to the galactic community. He's definitely had a conversation with a representative from the Galactic Defense Force, I know that much. Inez felt as though her head was spinning. Blake Robinson represented everything that was the opposite of Pascal Etienne. If Etienne really was out as UN leader, then a sweeping host of changes was about to happen on Earth and all across human territory. At that moment, a doctor came into the room with Inez's medical chart. The badge on his uniform identified him as a gene therapy specialist. He narrowed his eyes at Cassandra before ordering her to leave the room, saying, "This is not a conversation for children." Then he disconnected all of the IV tubes and monitoring equipment from Inez and helped her out of bed. I'm proud to say the procedure was a complete success, the doctor said. You are now completely sterile, though I would refrain from testing yourself out for a few days. Your body needs time to heal and recover. Because your collarbone is still healing from its recent injury, I'm ordering you to take it easy for the next 2 months. No hard labor, no strenuous activity until January. Keep any work as light as you can until after the new year. Understand? I understand, Inez said. I just hope my friends don't expect me to join them on their next expedition. We expect you to join us on this next expedition. Dude! Fuck you! Inez folded her arms and glared at Lawrence Ridge. She was aboard the defunct warship Kakama in the Gray Phoenix base, staring over a map of eastern Florida. The Wolverines and their many new allies were here, all trying to convince Inez that she needed to join them on their upcoming mission to Cape Canaveral. You spent the most time there, Piper Russell said. We've got plenty of people who infiltrated the base both before and after you got there, and I'm sure they'll be good guides. But you, Cassandra, and Professor Espinosa were the only ones to actually see the pediatric center. If we're gonna rescue those kids, you've gotta guide us in. Besides, Jay said, Piper brought back that machine Akira used to create her fake Jericho, so we won't have to worry about getting wiped like we did back in Michigan. Nezzy, you promised to go back and save my friends, Cassandra pouted. Frustrated, Inez gestured to a flat-screen television that was hanging from the ceiling. What are you guys so worried about? Inez countered. 'Cause to me, it looks like the whole war is going to be over in just a couple of months. The GDF and UN aren't fighting anymore. Hell, Robinson's probably gonna roll out a red carpet for them. You can just walk into Canaveral. The United Nations is not fighting because their military was destroyed, and their mercenaries have deserted them as well, General Osmer said. I assure you, there are still plenty of people loyal to the outgoing regime who are ready to continue resisting, and Scarlett Freeman will have surrounded herself with them. Her name is Akira, Inez growled. Can we just call her that? We all know. At this point, her real name might not matter, Colonel Mason Sharp interrupted. The fact of the matter is, the remaining high-profile names in the human supremacist movement are still on her side. Klaus Eberhard and Rafi Bakir from the military, Polly Spark from the Science Directorate, Inez Vasquez from the ISO, and that Sydney Bouclair woman who might take over Afune. They all know who the Paradox is. They probably grew up reading about her in history books, and I'll bet you anything they agree with her about human supremacy. If Akira is the grand architect of this war, then those people were the builders who did the actual work. We blow her cover, reveal to the whole world that Scarlett is Akira. All it will do is lure the human supremacists to her side. Crew Chief Magra raised his head, eyes wide. Why don't we do that then? He said. If it is as you say, we can not only reveal the Paradox to the galaxy, but we would force all of her allies into the open when they could be identified. And then immediately killed, Lawrence finished. I like that. That'll make it so much easier for us to get into Canaveral and save those kids. Plus, if the new SecGen really is friendly to the GDF, then we'd be giving them a helping hand. We need to get the message out, Inez said. Hyperwave is the best way to do it, right? Faster than light broadcasting, so Mom and her ISO goons can't stop us. There's a hyperwave terminal 2 decks below us, Shipbreaker Carfu said. We can transmit a message tonight. Give both Robinson and the GDF plenty of time to react. Robert, Jay's father, stood up and dusted off the front of his shirt. I'll deliver the statement, he said. I used to be a member of the UN government. People will recognize me, and my name may still carry some authority with it. There were a few murmurs and nods of assent, but General Osmer raised a hand for silence. I dissent, he said. There are only 2 people in this room who can convincingly reveal the Paradox's identity and be believed. It must be a member of her family. He turned to Emmanuel and Inez. She took a step back, shaking, while her father remained stoic. It must be one of you. The masses will be moved by your words. The authority and trust provided by your rank and status will carry your message to the highest levels of government, and you will be heard. And that was how, on a cold November evening, Inez Espinosa found herself standing in front of a hyperwave terminal aboard the old Kakama. She volunteered for the task without really knowing why. It just seemed right. Inez had changed clothes. She was wearing a woman's business suit, similar to the one worn by women who sat at the UN Security Council. She did not dare ask how much money it cost to buy this thing. Piper, Sarah, and Cassandra all frantically applied makeup to Inez's face, while someone just out of sight tied Inez's dirty blonde hair into a bun. Lawrence, Jay, and Emmanuel worked the hyperwave. They made sure the signal would be broadcasted into every UN facility, starbase, and colony capital. Emmanuel also figured out how to hijack the signal of the British Broadcasting Corporation. All of the British colonies in the Canis Major system will think it's a transmission from London, he said. Finally, there was nothing left to do. No preparations to make. Everything now rested on Inez's shoulders. Emmanuel pointed at the camera aperture and gave her the signal. Just above the camera, a holographic teleprompter flickered for a moment before lighting up. Two-dimensional words began to scroll up out of seemingly nowhere. Emmanuel, General Osmer, and Robert Lansing wrote the script together. It was short, and Inez could have memorized it, but this was easier. We're live in 5, 4, 3, 2. Inez took a deep breath, looked into the camera, and began to speak. Good evening. My name is Maria Madalena Inez Freeman Espinosa. I am a member of the United Nations government, where I hold the ranks of field operative in the Internal Security Office and commander in the United Nations Navy. I am here speaking to you tonight because a terrible crime is in process at this very moment, and action must be taken. For the past 2 years, you have been told that our nation is in the grip of a great crisis. A space storm separates our planets, while the galactic community ostracizes our species because of a minor armed conflict on a distant world. My friends and neighbors, we are in a very real crisis, but we have been lied to. Since June of 2084, the United Nations of Earth have been in a state of open warfare against the galactic community, a war that will come to an end mere days from now. Our new Secretary General, Blake Robinson, is already reaching out to our old allies, and I have no doubt that hostilities will end, and our brave men and women in uniform will return home. But our new leader does not know what I have learned. He does not know that at this very moment, the architects of this horrible war are on the cusp of escaping from this disaster with their lives, their freedom, and a second chance. The Internal Security Office has been taken over by the Paradox. Akira Robinson, the very same malicious time traveler who fought the Stormbreakers 50 years ago, has spent the past 25 years living under the identity of Scarlett Freeman. She is my mother, although I only learned her true identity recently. Akira Robinson has been using and abusing the powers that come with the position to carry on her designs. She manipulated and controlled the rest of our government and military. The cult of Jericho and the human supremacist movement are her pawns as well. The Paradox has not given up on her dream of a tyrannical empire of man. For the past 2 years, she and her lackeys have been using this war as a vehicle for Project Prometheus, an effort to restore the gift and construct a psionic army that would have been under her personal control. The Paradox has made significant progress towards this goal. She has developed and successfully tested a psionic weapon against the planet Amadeo. She has kidnapped approximately 6,000 alien children from all across the galaxy and held them in UN black sites, where they have been subjected to a wide range of inhumane scientific experiments. To my knowledge, only 200 of these children are still alive. They are being held in a black site at Cape Canaveral in Florida. It is clear to me that once her identity is exposed, Akira will attempt to escape, taking her victims and a cache of psionic weapons with her. If she is allowed to escape, Akira will get everything she wants, power and followers, unless we stop her. I know I'm asking a great deal. 15 men and women paid the price for our freedom half a century ago, and now she has a chance to take that all away again. by turning loose these psionic weapons and warriors she's worked for so long to perfect. Akira Robinson is the greatest nemesis our galaxy has ever known. With her time ship, she tampered in the lives of billions. She set whole nations onto different paths. She started wars, assassinated noble leaders, robbed countless people of their futures, and she would have destroyed our future if left unchecked. Akira triggered the first hyperspace war thousands of years ago. She orchestrated the Levakian uprising, turned Kyle Bradshaw's gun against J.D. Robinson, and allowed monstrous tyrants like Irisha Kimoto, Emperor Raisteu, and Makan to rise to power all over the galaxy. Without her time ship, the Paradox has proven to be just as dangerous, if not more so. After this war ends, there will be one last battle right here in Florida. I am going to fight Akira Robinson, my own mother. I am ready to pay the same price as the 15 Stormbreakers to secure our freedom and our future against the one woman who wants those things for herself and no one else. And I know I am not alone. If you are able and willing to fight, to rescue 200 innocents and make one last stand against the Paradox, then come to Orlando and join me here. We must stop Akira and rescue her victims at all costs. Nothing else matters. Fiat justitia ruat caelum. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall.